Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining in for this Serverless Days Paris warm-up session. I'm really glad to be here today with you for this new season of very awesome serverless talks around the world from renowned speakers. Today's agenda will be a very nice agenda since we'll be speaking about total cost of ownership of serverless application. Just before we jump into the main topic of today's conversation, I'd like to take the opportunity to speak a little bit about what are Serverless Days Paris, if this is the first time that you join us for the event. Serverless Days Paris, like all Serverless Days events, are community events gathering people with passions about serverless. And I'm very glad to be organizing the fourth edition of the Paris event. This year, we'll have 3 warm-up sessions, starting today with Ezhilarasi's talk. Main event will be hosted on June 7 at La Bellevilloise in the 20th district of Paris. Tickets are still open for sale on main website at paris.serverlessdays.io. I'd like to thank, of course, the reason why this kind of event can happen, our sponsors for this year's edition. So thank you very much, Theodo, AWS, Cloudflare, Serverless Guru, Algolia, Fastly, SmartDSI, and Programme. Without your support, this event could not happen. Thank you all for joining, and I will very soon leave the floor to Ezhilarasi Chezhiyan. Ezhilarasi is a passionate developer, passionate software builder. Her main mantras are empowering people and continuous learning. She's working in that regard at Kovai on Serverless360. And today she will be sharing with us tips and secrets to keep your serverless application total cost of ownership under control. So, Ezil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frederick. Thanks for this wonderful introduction. I'm super glad to be a part of this wonderful event, Serverless Days Paris 2023. Today, I'm here to share my experience that I have gained over the past decade in understanding what the total cost of ownership of serverless applications are and how the secret sauce to keep it under control. So I'm going to share my techniques or the tips that has worked well for enterprises, and that would be helpful for the listeners today too. A little bit about me, who am I, and why am I the right person to share about this topic. I'm Ezhilarasi, so I'm leading the product consultant team at Serverless 360 at Kovai.co. Serverless 360 is a product which is built using Azure for Azure. So we discovered a number of operational challenges while working with Azure integrations in production. We worked along with enterprises, discovered the challenges, and identified solutions for them. So that is in Serverless 360 as a product. With this learning, my current role gave me opportunity to interact with key stakeholders in enterprise customers, and along with them we understood what are the operational challenges that they encounter in the day-to-day production, and how we can optimize them to reduce the total cost of ownership. All my learnings is what I have curated as a session today, and I'm going to share it with you. That would be beneficial for the community as well. So what is in store for today? So we are going to understand what is the total cost of ownership of a serverless application. What are the various components or the drivers that would constitute to this total cost of ownership, and how do I keep them under control? What is the optimization strategy that I need to deploy in my Azure integration or even in your multi-cloud integration that would bring down the total cost of ownership? I'm not just going to give you the statements, I'm going to show you the facts of how we have transformed the operations or reduced the total cost of ownerships for a couple of our enterprise customers. So that's what I have in store for today. And who would be the right audience for this session? If you are a FinOps person or you are a cloud operations engineer. So this session is going to be incredibly useful for you. Or if you are a CTO or an chief product officer who is aiming at bringing down the total cost of ownership on your application, then this session has ideal content that's going to help you to devise an operation strategy. So, if you are an integration expert, if you are looking at effective utilization of your resource available, then this session has some valuable content for you. So stay with me until we discuss about what total cost of ownership is, discover the factors that would constitute to this total cost of ownership, and come up with a strategy that's going to keep it under control. I would like to begin the session with a disclaimer. So, all that I'm going to share today is out of my experience and the insights that I have derived out of the real world scenarios that I am exposed to when I worked with enterprises as a part of implementing or devising an operation strategy for them. So I'm also going to share two real-time case studies. However, these scenarios and the case studies, the facts that we derive out of the case studies, um, can may vary. The actual results may vary or differ based on the various factors that are very unique to each organizations and the business domains that we deal with. So please consider this disclaimer while interpreting the information that I share here, as an intent is to provide a general understanding and foster the meaningful discussions around TCO of serverless applications. So let's proceed further. Understanding what total cost of ownership is. When we proceed with the definition of the total cost of ownership, it's overall cost associated with developing, deploying, and operating and maintaining applications over their entire life cycle. So, what is the cost that I incur to set up a team, understand the requirement, develop an application, make it available to the customers by deploying it into a cloud platform, and how do I operate on a day in and day out to support my existing customers? Or how do I maintain it to keep it up to the face of the technology advancements or the client requirements? So, all these need to be considered when we compute the total cost of ownership. And it includes both the direct and indirect costs that are incurred by an organization throughout the life cycle of an application. So let us make the scope a little more specific to a serverless application, trying to understand what are the various components that would be a part of this total cost of ownership. So, out of my experience with the enterprise customers, I have come up with a split up of this total cost of ownership. What are the various factors that would constitute to the total cost of ownership of my entire application? So, out of these factors, some of them are significant players. That is, they are going to dominate their contribution to the total cost of ownership. But let us try to get an high level understanding of all these factors. Say the compute cost, as the name rightly says, it's the cost that I spend for computing in my serverless application. So one of the key reasons why organizations would choose to adopt to a serverless type of architecture would be to pay only for what we use. So that's where the majority of the cost is on the computational cost and automatic scaling based on the incoming request. So all these would correspond to the compute cost. So this turns out to be one of the significant player in contributing to the total cost of ownership. So every application is going to be associated with storage, isn't it? So if we utilize the storage the optimal way, we can keep it under control. So what if there are storage blobs that are created as a part of my application flow, but they are never being removed from my storage account? So this is going to keep constituting for my application cost irrespective of whether these are active storage content or obsolete content. So storage cost might be a key contributor to your total cost of ownership if they are not managed properly. Networking costs. So every application needs to be defined within a network. So some are in the public networks, some need to be protected by defining a private network around the application. So that cost also need to be considered when we compute the total cost of ownership. So, in some cases, my application might be working along with third party service providers. For example, my authentication is outsourced to an authentication provider, and I pay for the subscription that I acquire from the authentication provider to be inbuilt in my serverless application. So, that cost also constitutes here. So this entire setup might be monitored and logged, be it is residing in the Azure or the AWS or Google Cloud. So your entire integration needs to be monitored, right? And these applications generate logs, which also gets associated to a storage, or every logging solution that's being provided has a pricing tag associated to it. So we need to consider the monitoring and logging costs as well in the total cost of ownership. And ultimately, like the base of the entire serverless architecture is on a cloud service provider. Like you build your solution on a cloud service provider, right? So the cloud provider's cost is also to be considered in the total cost of ownership. Apart from all of this, there is another significant contributor, that is the operational cost. So once I build my solution, deploy it into the cloud service provider, make it available to my customers, I need to support this application day in and day out to ensure that my customer gets what they are intended to get. So that's where the operational cost would come into picture. So having in clarity on what are the various contributors to the total cost of ownership, it is also necessary to understand what is their degree of contribution, like how significant are they in the total cost of ownership. So here is where I arrived at an percentage of contribution that these various factors have in my total cost of ownership. Among these, two of them have a significant contribution. There is the compute cost and the operational cost, which needs our further deep diving into these two costs, understanding what are the various components that are under the compute cost and how do I effectively control them to keep the total cost of ownership under control. Let's also have a quick glance about the other costs that are not majorly involved, but it might even overrun when they are not paid attention to, especially the storage costs. As I told you, depending on the amount of data that is being stored, then this might also become a significant contributor. So it is necessary to have an eye on what do we store and what do we retain. So when you design your application, you need to ensure that every storage that you make has got an defined cleanup process as well when it is no longer necessary. And relatively, the network cost that is associated in your serverless application would be relatively smaller. And the third party service cost, when compared to the total cost of ownership, is negligible to substantial. And when you have a monitoring and logging solution that's integrated to enable monitoring on your underlying solution, it contributes to a very smaller percentage to the total cost of ownership, and same as the cloud provider. Though it is notable, it's predictable. Like when you decide in cloud service provider, you would have considered the pricing model of the various service providers, and you would have gone with an cautious decision. So these considering all these factors, there are two key contributors that need to be further understood and optimized to keep the total cost of ownership under control. Those are the compute cost and the operational cost, which we will see further in detail. Since the compute cost is a significant contributor of total cost of ownership, what are the various things that would impact this compute cost? First and foremost, the execution time. So let us pick up one of the services as an example to understand this concept better. Let's consider an Azure function or a Lambda function in AWS equivalent and function, which is expected to execute for a specific time to fulfill a specific business requirement. So this execution time of the function is going to have an impact on my total compute cost of my serverless application. And because serverless platforms, they charge for the time that's being taken to execute functions or services. So this is execution time is a key performance indicator that needs to be monitored to understand the consumption of your compute resources. And how can I fine tune it or optimize it? You need to do encode optimization. So as the functions will allow you to deploy your code into the cloud platform. So you just need to focus on the business logic and you get your application running in an cloud solution which can be consumed by other services or by your third party services, right? So in that case your code should be optimal. You need to optimize your code to effectively run within the execution time to fulfill the business requirement. So you need to fine tune your application logic to reduce unnecessary computations. So this is a key when we need to keep an execution time in control, which is a key contributor to the computation cost. Next is a memory allocation. So every function is charged based on the execution time, memory allocation, and the count of executions. So it's necessary to have an eye on all these three matrices. So these are exposed to us as metrics which can be monitored and to keep an eye on them. Well, when it comes to a memory allocation, you need to choose the appropriate memory configuration when you when you spin a resource. So when you spin a resource, choose the appropriate memory configuration. This also depends on your business requirement. So have an eye on and then choose the most appropriate memory as configuration. Concurrency and scaling. In many cases, there is a need for simultaneous execution of multiple requests, but you need to put a limit on the number of simultaneous executions the business is expected to have, because this would invite additional computational cost when you are demanding your application to run in concurrency. And this also brings in automatic scaling into picture, and there is a cost associated with automated scaling. So we need to have a proper configuration of concurrency settings in your serverless service that you procure. Request based pricing. So each function invocation or each API request that's made to my function or the service will have a cost associated to it. So you need to analyze your application's traffic and optimize the design patterns to minimize the number of requests that you make to your underlying service. So this will have a considerable reduction in your computation cost. So idle times and cold starts. So what is an cold start? When my application or when my function is not being invoked for a while, it gets into an idle time. So that when my application or my function is expected to resume after a cold start, it requires a platform to provision new compute resources. So you ensure or architect your solution in such a way that there is a minimal idle time and so that you can optimize the cold start performance, or you choose your appropriate tier based on your business application. So if you are expecting your business application to be idle for a while and your function needs to be spin, then choose an alternate hosting plan than the consumption plan to prevent the cold start problem. Platform specific charges. So this every cloud service provider will have a per millisecond billing granularity and additional charges that are associated with platform procurement, or say device procuring an app insights along with a function app is going to invite additional cost. Every alert rule that you create on your Azure function is going to involve additional cost. Is there any data transfer cost associated? All these need to be paid attention to when you are procuring a resource. So compare the pricing models when evaluating the computational compute while evaluating the compute resources, and then procure the resource. So all these parameters are the key matrices that needs to be monitored on, or rightly configured to keep the computational cost under control. So that's where the need for monitoring and analytics comes into picture. And Azure Portal offers monitoring on Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and Application Insights, a range of monitoring solutions that can help us have an eye on the key performance matrices. However, there is a challenge associated with this as well, which we will try to understand now. So that is leading us to the operational cost associated to and serverless integration that's built in Azure or in any cloud service provider. So let us take Azure portal as one of the examples. So in typical scenarios, we have also worked with cases wherein the integration is built by consuming services from various cloud service providers. So in this case, let us pick up the Azure portal as one of the example of a cloud service provider and try to understand what exactly the operational challenge here is and how we can mitigate it by providing a solution to it. So what we have observed is the in an organization, in a typical support scenario, operation scenario, there will be different stakeholders who are involved in supporting the application day in and day out. There could be business users who are directly facing the customer facing support team, who are the business users. There could be level one support team who is expected to respond to customer support requests, and there will be a level two support team with and an Azure expert team. So this terminologies might differ depending on organizations. So this could also translate to an cloud ops team, wherein or IT ops team who are responsible of performing similar operational tasks. So, what is their challenge? So, you cannot expect them to have the same level of knowledge as that of an Azure expert who has built this integration. So, they might not have visibility on the underlying Azure integration. Say, for example, the business users might be masters of the business data, so they can easily translate to or understand where exactly the business transaction has failed, what does the order ID in my transaction flow mean. But they will not have a clear understanding of which Azure function is executing this particular business logic and which has caused the problem in my transaction flow. So for them, the Azure portal is a bit too complex. So that's where there is a need to provide them visibility on the underlying integration status, but not through the Azure portal, because Azure portal might be too complex for these people, and there is a risk of performing wrong actions without the adequate knowledge on them. And the level 2 support team has got limited experience on the underlying solution, and you can though they realize what the problem is, they do not have the knowledge or the tool set to operate on this underlying resource and then resolve it. For example, the scenario goes like this. I have an customer that's coming up asking for what happened to a particular order. So this business users do not have any visibility on the transactions of this integration. Hence, they are struck with not unable to provide a solution. And when they are provided access to the Azure portal, it seems to be too complex for them to understand and analyze the root cause of the problems. So, because of which, what happens is there is a considerable amount of support that is being held as an overhead by the Azure expert team. That is, so they, because of lack of knowledge, lack of visibility, and complexity of the Azure portal, the Azure expert team is invited to take up these support tasks. 80% of the support tasks were lying in the table hands of the Azure expert team. So, what impact this will cause on the total cost of ownership? I'm investing the time and effort of an expert user, an expensive resource in solving support tasks. So my business innovation is brought down because the effort is invested on operations task, and my time to get back to the customer is prolonged, like there is a longer resolution time, which causes customers dissatisfaction. And because I'm investing expensive resources into support tasks, I am elevating the total cost of ownership. So this is a scenario for which we need to identify a solution. So how do we democratize support here? How do we enable the business users or the support team to take up the support tasks? So that's where we need to bring in an operation friendly interface that will enable these less experienced people to understand what has gone wrong with their Azure integration and resolve the issue without the intervention of your Azure expert team. That's exactly what Serverless 360 does. So we are devising a portal, a Serverless 360, that will give an operation-friendly interface to the support users. So because of which they are able to identify an issue with their integration, resolve it without even the intervention of the expert team. So this is where we have shifted left the support, which is a key or need of enterprises to keep the total cost of ownership under control. So these numbers, what we see here, like shifting more than 80 percentage of the support away from the Azure expert team, is not just the numbers. We have achieved that in with our enterprise customers. So before we proceed further with the case study, I would like to quickly show you a glimpse of the portal in contrast to what is offered in the Azure portal itself. So here is what we see in the Azure portal. So a bunch of resources. In a more complex scenario, I might have the resources from various subscriptions and regions that's spread across various subscriptions and regions to be managed and monitored. So all that I see is a bunch of siloed resources. If I want to get an instant feedback on the status of one of my logic apps, I really don't get to see that here. I do not know if there is any failure with my logic app right here, or I do not know whether there are any orders that are unprocessed by my business application. So this becomes hard for my operations team to visualize what exactly the problem is. And in many cases, there is a risk in providing access to the non-technical people to the Azure portal. So that's where we bring out the operation-friendly interface that Serverless 360 offers. So that same subscription that you see in the Azure portal, wherein I do not have an instant feedback on the status of the resources, I get to see them as business applications in Serverless 360. I have logically grouped the resources into business applications, and I get an instant feedback on their status right in the dashboard. So that in case of any issue, it calls me for action to further drill down and understand what exactly the problem is and how can I rectify it. Let me switch to another account of mine wherein I manage different customers integrations. So this allows you to onboard resources across tenants and bring them to one single dashboard, wherein this failure is brought to me as on the spotlight. Like I can exactly locate which of my business application has got a problem, and I can drill down to understand what exactly is the resource that is got an issue. So this can bring down in the resolution time to a considerable level. So I spot that a particular resource has got enormous number of dead letter messages. So what does dead letter message in a real-time scenario mean? My business has got certain incoming orders that are left unprocessed. so which is not good for my business, isn't it? So you should enable your operations team member to view the reason behind the dead letter messages, understand what exactly the problem is, and then resolve it. See, from the service map, I get to understand that the logic app that's listening to my service bus queue is healthy and it is good. It is expected to process the messages that comes into my queue, but for some reason these messages were not processed. So I get an interface in Serverless 360 that enables me to view the dead letter reason and the content of the message event. So I get to understand what exactly is the reason why this order was not processed at this point in time. So I have the option to repair and reprocess this order without even the intervention of my expert user. So I understand that the messages have landed up in this queue because due to a reason like time to live expired exception. So, what does this exception mean? The logic app that's listening to the queue did not pick up the messages and then process within the allowed time to live. And this has caused the messages to end up in the dead letter queue. So I have now ensuring that my logic app is up and running. I have a possibility of reprocessing these messages. I am resubmitting these messages back into the same queue so that the logic app, which is up and running, can pick this up and then process. So this interface is so operation friendly that you can allow your support team members to perform this operation that can restore your business without even the intervention of your expert team. So this way you are shifting left the support to reduce the total cost of ownership. That is, reduce the cost associated with fixing an issue, and you are getting back to your customer sooner. This is a proactive measure. Like even before your customer comes and asks for a particular order, your team can detect if there is anything that's being processed and resolve that even before the business impact is being felt. We're talking about the compute services and the necessity of monitoring the key performance matrices on these resources to understand their consumption, isn't it? So that is also possible in one single consolidated report using this tool set. Like you can devise a monitoring strategy that will have an eye on all the key performance matrices of my resources. Say, for example, we were talking about the memory consumption, the execution count, and the instance count. So these are certain key parameters that needs to be monitored, isn't it? So the average memory working set of my function app, how many concurrent instances are being spent. If it goes beyond a particular limit, I can choose to get an alert on. And I can also have an eye on the number of executions of my function app to completely monitor all the key matrices that would constitute to my compute cost, which in turn is a significant contributor to the total cost of ownership. You can define a threshold limit and choose to get an alert when there is a breach of these threshold limits. So this monitoring and analytics on your key performance indicators are critical when you need to have the total cost of ownership within control. So let us look at one of the case studies that translate to what we were talking here. So here is an scenario. It's a fintech organization, who build a number of fintech solutions to significant customer base here. So Provalgo realized that their team requires a consolidated view across the end-to-end technology environment that they have built, and they wanted this to be real-time visibility, which enables proactive monitoring. That is, even before the business realizes that there is something wrong with their business, the team should be provided with an interface that will give them and complete observability on their cloud integration, helps them spotlight where exactly the problem is and then resolve it proactively before the business gets impacted. So, with devising an operation strategy using Serverless 360, they could achieve a 100% efficiency in monitoring. That is, all their resources were brought under monitoring, and any threshold breach on their key matrices were brought into spotlight on the dashboard of the business applications module in Serverless 360. So this brought a considerable reduction in their total cost of ownership. So we could reduce their total cost of ownership by 80% by shifting left their support to their operations team, and this also had an impact on their resolution time. So since it was a proactive monitoring setup, they could discover the problems even before the business reported it, and they could resolve it, improving the resolution time by 90%. So, from the words of their technical support executive, so we could understand that they could replace an entire team by a single person who relies on Serverless 360 to discover any problems and resolve them proactively. So, before we talk about another case study on a logistic and automated solution, let us talk about further shifting left the support. So, in many cases, the integration is not limited to Azure only. So in many cases, it might spread across in Azure services. It might include services from other cloud service providers, or it, as part of the application might be residing in on-premise and in the stock server, and part of the application might be in Azure itself. And in such hybrid scenarios, native cloud and multi-cloud scenarios, irrespective of what your business application scenario is, you might need an end-to-end tracking solution. Why is it important in the context of shifting left the support or reducing the total cost of ownership? Because you need to enable your business users who are facing the customers to fulfill your customers' requests, isn't it? So that would be the most efficient way to resolve an customer query. Like by you enabling them with an interface that will give them a functional tracking of the solution. Because what we observed is more than 90% of the issues that happen in production are data errors or functional errors, which can very well be offloaded to your business users, freeing up your critical resources to focus on business innovation. But they need to be enabled with an end-to-end tracking solution and a comfortable interface that will help them discover any problem. Say, for example, this business activity monitoring is a solution from Serverless 360 that will help you discover any challenges with your underlying business flow. So here I get a real-time tracking of the information that's flowing through my business application, and I get to understand, is there anything that has got a problem. So I spot an transaction that has failed, and I would like to drill down and understand which stage has failed, what exactly is the reason behind the failure. So here I get to understand that there was an error in processing the data that has been sent to this particular stage. So when I want to further understand what exactly was the message, I can understand it from the tracked message. So this is the exact message that has gone through this particular stage, and it seems to be empty, and that's the reason why this particular transaction has not got processed. So this level of insights on and real-time tracked information can help the business user to spotlight what the reason behind the failure and either resolve it by themselves. Say they have an option to reprocess this transaction with valid information, or assign this to another individual who has got a better understanding on this integration to reprocess them. It's possible to monitor this business flow for any exception. You can choose to monitor on duration, say when the transaction is long running. taking time and execution time of this transaction is beyond the allowed limit, I can choose to get an alert on it. So as we saw in one of the key contributors to the compute cost is the execution time. So any long running transaction is going to consume more on my total cost than that is expected to cost. So I can turn on duration monitor to get an alert when an business transaction takes beyond the expected limit. In case of any exception in the application, I can choose to get an alert on any exception, or I can be specific about a particular exception code or business exception error that needs to be addressed on priority. You can also fire queries and then get an alert on, say, a number of failures in a particular location. If it is going beyond five, then I need to pay a special attention to it. Such monitors can be scheduled here to have an eye on any business exception that's going to impact my customers. So proactive measures can be put in place to address these challenges with an self-service portal for business users. So here is another case study, another customer of Serverless 360 Solver who delivers automation solutions for logistics and retail scenarios. So their support team was growing, like their cloud integration was growing, and they had to scale their support team. And they were attempting to build custom tools for multiple people to work on the integration platform. So be it managing the dead letter messages or managing the failures in their business workflow. So there were operational activities that was growing along with the evolution of their Azure integrations. So that is where they wanted to devise a strategy to bring down this uncontrolled explosion of their support cost, operational cost. So that's where we devised an strategy using Serverless 360, and we ensured that their exceptions are handled. They get an visibility on their business flow, which can help them accurately or proactively monitor for any exceptions, and accurate reporting through appropriate notification channels enabled them to resolve the issues upfront. So that's resulted in an 80% efficiency in monitoring their entire business flow, and 90% offload of their support to the business users, and that in turn cost 90% reduction in the total cost of ownership. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I'm open to any discussions on whatever we discussed today.
Thank you very much, Ezil. Thank you very much for sharing these use cases with us and sharing your thoughts on what are the main driver for total cost of ownership increase and how to make sure that we keep them under control. I got quite a few questions from my side following your presentation today. First of all, during the presentation, you pointed out the fact that, depending on the context, of course, but two of the main drivers for total cost of ownership could be on one side compute cost, on the other side operational cost. If I am a small team and I don't have a clue about what is the first point to look at, how can I see, without deep diving on each of those two costs, where to start? Should I worry first about my support level, or should I worry first about optimizing my code, optimizing my memory, making sure my concurrency is under control, all this kind of stuff? What should be your advice on that?
Yes. So first and foremost, we need to optimize our code, because when we build the solution itself, we have to build it right, considering its use cases, considering the optimizations on keeping the cost under control. And once we have successfully built and then taken it to production, then comes the operations cost. But what we have also seen when we are dealing with enterprise scale is, when we design the application itself, operations has to be considered as one of the parameters, and because even the well architectured framework says that operational excellence is one of the key parameters that we need to consider when we design our application. So if you strictly want me to rank it which one to go first, then compute cost and then the operations cost, but they both have equal importance.
Okay, noted. Should we, at development stage, take something
Mm,
into account to make sure that operations run
mm,
smoothly afterward? Usually, code efficiency, there are a bunch of tools out there that help you optimize to make sure that your code is running as fast as possible and that the configuration is the correct
mm,
one. I have some example in mind for AWS, like the power tuning helper, for example, that is trying out multiple memory configuration and selecting the
mm,
ones that should result in lower cost. So those
mm,
are developer tooling that can be easily adopted by development teams to make sure that at development stage, cost
mm,
optimization in terms of compute cost is
mm.
an ongoing process. But what
Yes.
should we worry about as a development team in terms of
Mm.
operational excellence and reducing cost at this stage? What a development team should put in place to make sure that they think about that?
Correct. So, what are the monitoring tools that I'm going to choose to monitor these solutions? Say certain things, say like app insights for Azure Functions has to be started utilizing right from the phase of my development itself. So, what is the cost associated with that? We need to have a very good clarity on. Like when I choose the monitoring solution, be it a native cloud service producer offered monitoring solution, or am I going to choose the additional like third party monitoring solution? So this their direct cost should be taken into account, and if the third party monitoring solution is going to add up to my APIs on my resources for accessing its metrics, for accessing its logged information, so those also should be taken into consideration. And most importantly, like what is the deployment cost of the third party solutions? Say in some solutions might need an agent to be deployed or an entire application to be deployed within my Azure subscription, so that would deploy additional resources here. So what are the costs associated with that? So all these need to be considered, Frederick.
Okay. And is there any impact to be considered directly at the development stage? So, for example, should I instrument my code in a specific way to make sure that
Mm,
operation can go well afterwards? For example, in your presentation, you were showing at some
mm,
point in the first use
mm,
case a
mm.
map, an architectural map of how is working the
Yeah.
application together. Is
Yes.
this something that is deduced from Serverless 360, or is this something that developer needs to actually instrument within their code at the development stage?
So the first use case that I showed you, where there was a service map that helped me detect there was a dead letters in the queue. So that
Mm,
doesn't need any instrumentation in your code. It is
okay.
discovered from the resources that's associated, and based on the properties and matrices of the resources, it helps you understand the status. So that doesn't
Okay.
need any of your development effort to be considered at the early stage. But the second use case that I showed, to have an end-to-end tracking of the message across your business components, that involves instrumentation, so that needs to be considered. So what we recommend is to keep this as loosely coupled as possible. So your code should fire and forget messages to these third party integrations, so that your actual business flow does not get impacted at all, or there is no additional execution time or execution counts that's added to your actual business flow. Without impacting that, you need to keep these integrations as loosely coupled as possible.
Okay. And can they always be added at a later stage? Because some team will
Mm.
say,
Yeah.
we are very early on, we have not a product that is mature enough at the moment, we are a startup building a new venture. We are not
Yeah,
concerned about operation at that stage. Is it easy to come
that's
back
correct.
later on an existing architecture and try to instrument it afterwards?
Yeah, it is easy, but it is much easier when you consider it at the early stage. So these solutions that we build, we keep into consideration that their solution might be already mature and being utilized by the customers. So these should get into the solution without impacting the existing users and existing application. So it is built considering that. However, it's a very good idea to consider it as you build your application to be fail proof from the day one of your operations.
Hmm. Okay. On a separate subject, what I found, for example, in your first demonstration, you showed that that letter queue message could be replayed easily by a level 1 support team member, um,
Mm,
modifying some part of the message.
mm,
To me, it feels like the development team that put in place the feature knows what is the expected payload format to have the message processed correctly, and this information might be missing to a level 1 support engineer that would
correct.
receive messages not being processed but don't know
Mm,
what to change to make them process correctly. So how
mm.
do you make this level 1 support engineer talk with the development team, and what should be their discussion to make sure that they have everything they need, all the documentation they need to change messages on the fly when they found them in the dead letter queue?
That's a very valid point, Frederick. And this differs with business. Actually, we have come across cases wherein it is fine for N level one support person to modify the message. For example, say if it is an vendor assignment phase. So if this particular vendor is inactive, the support user has an idea about who else is the vendor ID that needs to be mapped on here, or they just need to modify a property of the message and then resubmit it. So that's why what we have done is this is completely controllable. That is when, say, me as an operation strategist, I can define on who can perform what operation. I can define a granular user access policy that will allow them only to resubmit. Yes, I can turn on only the resubmit permission. If I can allow them to reparent resubmit, I can do that. And I also have a complete governance and auditing in place, which will help me understand or view all the operations that users have done on the integration services.
Okay. So you have ways to
Control
make
it.
very granular permission on the software. Okay.
That's correct.
But do you recommend putting in place some rituals to have those people together at a certain
Mhm.
frequency to make sure that operational
Absolutely.
excellence from a person that did not develop the solution can happen
Mm.
smoothly?
Absolutely. So we do recommend a regular audit on these operations to ensure that only the designated people perform these.
Okay. And the other way around as well, like if I am a support engineer, level 1, level
Mm,
2, or even an Azure expert, and I repost some messages with a change
mm,
in the message that should not
mm.
be in the dead
Have
letter
done.
queue. When you see something in the dead letter queue, it needs to be
Mm,
reprocessed.
mm,
Modifying the message and redriving the message is a short-term solution for this specific message. But there
mm.
should be long-term modification within the application code itself to make sure that
Correct.
this specific scenario does not
Mm,
happen again. What do you
mm,
recommend in terms of rituals as well to make sure that short-term solution used by support engineer can
mm.
drive development from the development team to ensure those exception does not occur again in the application? What should we put in place to?
Correct. So that is not the scope of this product. Serverless 360's aim is only to shift left. But what you are saying is exactly correct. Like if to prevent this failure to happen in future. So if this invites a code change, then that has to be created as a ServiceNow ticket. So we have integration to ServiceNow, and we can create a ticket to the concerned developer to have a look
Mhm.
into it. So then that gets into a different system that comes under tracking, and they need to
Okay.
track to globally.
Okay. So ticketing should be the main solution to drive long-term fix for the solution. Okay.
Yeah.
Apart from code instrumentation, what is the overall cost of configuring for a product like Serverless 360 or any other monitoring product for operational excellence? What's the
Mhm.
cost to actually configure the product to be useful on day one of operation?
Yes. So, along with the product cost, we also give you a best practice package cost that will include for configuring the tool. That is, you get on-call support from the consultants at the Serverless 360 who will work along with your team, understand your business requirement, and then devise the operation strategy to configure the tool to meet that needs, your business needs. So that is shipped as a package along with the product cost to give
Okay.
clarity on the
Yeah.
total cost.
No, my question was more on, I assume there is a third-party service cost using this kind of
Yeah.
tool, of course, but there is also an upfront step that you need to take if you
Yeah.
want to onboard a monitoring solution. Because if you just plug in a monitoring solution without doing anything, like setting all the thresholds, setting all the error and the warning, this takes time
Mm.
to actually to a person to know what should be the correct threshold and what should be the correct warning to put in
Correct.
place.
Correct. Correct.
I'm making some parallel here with technical monitoring solution that out of the box points all the exceptions that happen in the application, but knowing which exception should be actually looked at first, because this actually impacts the user experience of
Mm.
somebody on the
Mm.
platform, is
Mm.
another set of skills that needs to be deployed to be able
Correct.
to operate the application.
That's correct, Frederick. So, what we have ideally seen is we'll have integration experts or CTOs who come up with this plan. Like they will have a plan. All that they need is how do we implement this? What is the right tool to get this achieved? So, they will have a need for observability. They'll know that I need a tool that's going to give me an observability on my Azure integration. And they might have a predefined set of exceptions that they would like to
Mm.
monitor on. But in case if they do not have, we do recommend that we do recommend them to come up with this basic understanding of their integration, what needs to be monitored, and how what are the priority exceptions that need to be escalated, what are the threshold limits that needs to be set on the key performance indicators. These are being educated to uh, people who are taking up the solution. That, as you rightly said, that understanding and clarity on the integration is very much required to devise the strategy right.
Okay. So if we have to take something away from your talk, that would be mainly to make sure
Mm.
that at the beginning of development, during the
Mm.
development of the product, operation should be a key part of what should be taken into account during those development to make sure that correct exception, clear visibility, and known metrics can be extracted from the application going life cycle, so that you can shift left afterwards and reduce your total
Yes,
cost of ownership running support for your customers. Correct?
that's an excellent summary of the entire talk.
No,
Thank you
but
so
that
much.
was a very good presentation to actually extract this from your presentation. So I never thought of operation cost as one of the main driver for total cost of ownership. As a tech guy,
Me too.
I usually drift directly to the compute cost or storage cost or this kind of stuff.
Mm.
But it's nice to see a different point of view and saying actually making sure your application can be operated by somebody with less technical knowledge is something that will
Correct.
make you save money at the end of the day.
That's exactly. That's the key takeaway.
Okay.
Thanks to you, Frederick.
Thank you, Ezil. It was a very nice talk. Thank you so much for your time and for your participation for this year event. I hope everybody who joined live or will watch this on replay will enjoy it as much as we did. Do you have a final word, Ezil, that you want to share with us?
I had equally great experience sharing my learnings here at Serverless Paris event. Frederick, thanks for this opportunity. Let's connect further in a lot more events like this.
Thank you very much, Ezil. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Everybody have a great day. And we'll see each other for another session of Serverless Days Paris warm up next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central European Standard Time. I will soon release more information about this second session, and I hope many of you can attend as well. Thank you very much for your time today, and take care until
Thank
next
you.
time. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.